So we've said that there are really strong connections between the Mishnah of Nazir and the Mishnah of Nedarim. And by the way, we've also said in the past that there are connections between the Mishnah of Nedarim and the Mishnayot of Ketubot. Because all of these tractates, they're grouped together loosely under the heading of women. But actually what connects them is the power of language. They're all connected together by the power of language. And in the early Mishnayot of the second chapter of Nazir, we started to learn about vows that kind of might be indeterminate or unclear, or sometimes they sound ridiculous, like, the cow that says, I'll be a Nazirah if I stand up. And now as we get further into the second chapter, we'll look at vows that seem to be impossible to fulfill. So we begin in the fourth Mishnah, Hareni Nazir al-Manat she'ehei shoteh v'yayin u'mitamel al-meitim. So I'm going to be a Nazir on condition that I can drink wine or can have contact with the dead. Now, we know there are three prohibitions about being a Nazir. There's not cutting your hair, okay, but there's also not drinking wine and not having contact with the dead. This is impossible, absolutely impossible. And the Mishnah rules, Nazir ve'asur b'chulam. All these things are forbidden. You can't make a condition like that. And in fact, we learned in the Mishnah of Ketubot. This is, I think, a saying of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. V'chol hamatneh al ma shekatuv b'torah tna'o vatel. If someone makes a condition which is contrary to what's written in the Torah, the condition is completely null and void. You can't say you're going to be a Nazir and then say you're not going to do these things. The condition, it just has no standing. What, however, if he made the vow in error, if he didn't know what he was getting into? And that's the second case our Mishnah will bring. Yodea ani sheyesh nazirim. So I know that there are things like there's Nazirut. I know there are Nazir. Aval eini yodea she'hanazir asur b'yayin. I don't know that a Nazir is forbidden to drink wine. So this is not the person who swore he's going to become a Nazir on condition he can drink wine. That's clearly ridiculous. The condition has no value. But he's taken on the vow as a result of a misconception. And we know, by the way, that a vow as a result of misconception is not a vow. We know that. And interestingly, Harezi Asur, the Mishnah rules, he's still Asur, he's forbidden, but Rabbi Shimon at this point is going to permit. Rabbi Shimon is going to permit on the grounds that a vow taken under a misconception is not a vow. That is to say, Rabbi Shimon just exempts him completely from the obligations in the Zimud. What about Yodea ani shehanazir asur b'yayin aval savur hayiti shechachamim matirin li. I know that a Nazir is forbidden to drink wine, but I thought the sages would give me permission. I thought the sages would let me off. And we know, of course, the sages can release people from vows. Why might the sages have let him off? Well, let's find out more. I can't live without drinking wine. I'm dependent on alcohol. Or, I'm a professional grave digger. This is more than a grave digger. I'm a professional burier. Not quite clear from the Mishnah whether he earns his livelihood from burying people, or perhaps he's the only person that can bury. Maybe the community is dependent on him as a burier, as a grave digger and interrer. But for whatever reason, his profession is burying the dead. And actually, the Mishnah rules the other way around. Hareze mutar. He's permitted. And there is another Mishnah, which we've already learned at the beginning of Nedarim, There are 4 vows the sages permitted. Nidrei zruzin, those which are just sort of exaggerations. Nidrei havai, that's the vows of exaggeration. Nidrei shugagot. Okay, those are vows in error. We might be dealing with a vow in error here. And then nidrei anasim, vows under duress. And we said under duress might mean he's forced to make the vow, or he might mean he's forced to break the vow. But the Mishnah, in this case of the professional grave digger, the Mishnah seems to rule that he's let off. Harei mutar, he's permitted. But again, Rabbi Shimon is going to forbid, because Rabbi Shimon actually disagrees with the idea that you can get out of a vow because it's a vow of duress. What if you say, I'm a Nazir and I'm going to bring an offering of another Nazir? Hareini Nazir ve'alai legaleach Nazir. I'm a Nazir and I bring it upon myself legaleach, to shave another Nazir. Now, what does the expression to shave another Nazir mean? Let's go back to the Psukim. We're going to go back to Numbers. We looked at the first 10 Psukim of the 10th chapter. That's the first 10 verses, which outline the prohibitions of a Nazir. But we haven't looked yet at what happens at the end of a Nazir's term. We've learned that in general, you're a Nazir for 30 days, unless a longer term is specified. What happens at the end of the 30 days? Well, he brings 3 sacrifices. He brings a burnt offering, he brings a sin offering, chatat, and he brings a peace offering, as well as some unleavened bread and cakes of fine flour and wafers and so on. He brings all these offerings, but in principle, there are 3 animal offerings. 3 animal offerings. The burnt offering, the sin offering, the peace offering. And the priest brings them before God at the altar, and then he cuts his hair. And the priest takes the hair and puts it on the fire, which is underneath the sacrifice of the peace offerings. So in other words, he brings these offerings, but his hair is burnt on the altar at the same time. And then the priest takes the offering or some of the offerings and puts them onto the hands of the Nazir, and after he's shaven his head, and then after the offerings are waved in front of the Lord, at that point the Nazir can drink wine. So he can drink wine, but after he's performed this ceremony of bringing the sacrifices, and shaving his head, with the shavings of his head burnt on the altar. So when the Mishnah talks about Hareini Nazir v'alai legaleach Nazir, when the Mishnah talks about shaving a Nazir, actually what it's talking about is bringing the 3 sacrifices of the Nazir, or bearing the cost of bringing the 3 sacrifices of the Nazir at the end of his term. And this is a significant sum. These are 3 animal sacrifices. So what happens? V'shamach havero, his friend heard it. Ve'amar, his friend said, V'ani alai legaleach Nazir. And also, I'm going to be a Nazir too, and I'm going to shave a Nazir. So they've both taken the obligation of being a Nazir, which means bringing 3 sacrifices, and the additional obligation of bringing 3 sacrifices for some other Nazir. Im hayu pigchim, if they're sharp, if they're shrewd, megalchin zeh zeh, if they're shrewd, they will shave each other. That is to say, they'll bring each other's hair offerings. So they could kind of pair up, so they don't have to bring the extra offering. They do it for each other. Im love. If not, they're going to have to bring hair offerings on behalf of other Nazirim. So effectively, they're going to have to pay twice for their Nazirut. Can they shave half a Nazir? Harei alei legaleh chatzi nazir. I take it upon myself to shave half a nazir. I take it upon myself to shave half a nazir. What is shaving half a nazir? Is actually bearing half the cost of the offerings. And his friend heard, his friend heard, and he also says, I take it upon myself to bring half a hair offering. So what's going to do? What are we going to do? Well, the Mishnah rules, Nazir Shalem, Nazir Shalem. They each have to bring a full offering for another Nazir, because you can't shave half a Nazir, or at least this is what Rabbi Meir says. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim Omrim, and the Chachamim say, and this is the halacha, Ze megaleh chatzi Nazir, veze megaleh chatzi Nazir. Each one of them brings half a hair offering. So I guess they could do it in this case for each other.